And that's my father's working on the pond there. And there he is with a bullhead. On a bigger diesel, you can see where it says Lehigh Valley Railroad. That's Bill behind him in the cab. And that's Paul in the doorway of the cab. And that's Bill up behind him. My father was taking him for a ride. Picture of Paul getting off the Black Diamond. My mother used to take him for a ride to Pennsylvania or Tunkhannock down and back. She'd take him for a ride on the train. I told you my mother spoiled him. That's the conductor helping Paul down off the train. That's taken down in Clifton Springs Station. He's getting off what is known as the best passenger train on the Lehigh, the Black Diamond. Father, as I said, Paul was always on it. My father made a homemade boat once and need the oars for it. And here he's giving Paul a ride out on the pond. That's Paul's grandfather and Paul riding on the pond. My mother and father would take a trip to Pennsylvania, and this is one of their trips, standing on a mountain, a scenic view in Pennsylvania, and of course Bill, Paul, and his grandmother. That's the three of them in Pennsylvania. As you can see, the backdrop, there's a lot of mountains there, and the Susquehanna River. Bulldozers in to knock down his apple orchards, helping his pond, and of course, sitting on the bulldozer, guess who? He got in every picture there ever was. This is Paul sitting on a bulldozer down the pond while they were cleaning out. This is later when my father had built a diving board up, and he had railroad ties and everything there, and the kids would be swimming down there all the time. And this is Paul on the diving board. Mr. America. One summer, we rented Lathrop's cottage on Honeoye Lake, and they had a sunfish sailboat that held 2 people. And this is Paul and I on Honeoye Lake in Chick Lathrop's sunfish. Paul and I, of course, we got our life preservers on because we're so safety conscious. But Paul and I. To show you, this is my mother. Paul's in the back seat. And as usual, she's taking him someplace. As I said, she spoiled that kid rotten. There he is in the back seat of the car. My mother's driving. This is the birthday party that Paul had down to the farm. And some of them in the front there, you can see the Darduini in front. And off to the right is Jimmy, Moses. And then behind Jimmy is Paul. And they vary as you go back. And that's a Fitzgerald way back in the background. And as you come around, I'm not sure, but there's another Fitzgerald there. That's one picture of his party. Of course, on the right-hand side is Paul. And next to him is one of the Hale boys. And then as you go down further, you run into Fitzgerald way down, Mike Fitzgerald. And of course, Helen's waiting on him. And then you come up through the line, and I think that's another Hale, and Darduini here on the end. Picture that glorious group. And on the left would be the Hale, and then Paul, and then Jimmy, Moses, and on the other side we come across the Dardawini, and that next one looks like Mark, and then a Fitzgerald, and I'm not sure who's in the front holding the hot dog. Great for giving Paul a ride on diesels. And he'd take him on trips with him. Highly illegal, but this is Paul, standing alongside the diesels, ready to go out on a freight, and Carl Ragoza's with him. Carl used to live out on Pratt Road. See, my father's traveling suitcases in front of him. That's Paul and Carl Ragoza. Carl was Dad, my father's show, but this is Paul with his grandmother. They were a pair, and they're standing. The willow trees behind him, where the swimming pool is today. A picture of Paul riding the tractor around the barn. My father was giving him something to do. This is a picture of Paul standing next to the Renault that we bought so that Lynn could have a driver's license. That's Paul. Of course, this is Paul after a snowstorm, standing out, looking down towards downtown. As you can see, the snow used to get pretty deep. He's got his mittens on. He's been shoveling snow. Snow is almost up to his hips. Standing in front of the first new car we ever owned, a Plymouth. He's got his hat on with all the buttons and everything on it. And that's Igley's house, Audrey Igley's house across the street. But this is the picture of Paul and John Langford. John Langford looks a little different today. That's Paul and Johnny Langford. At this time, I can't think of his age, but this is Paul. And I would say it's about 1964 or 65. He had a few freckles in. That's little Paul Edding. I like his freckles. Same time, but he looks about the same age. Paul always liked to help Bill in his hour of need. And he was glad as long as he wasn't sitting in the dentist chair. So that's Bill and Paul over the Birches. Of course, Bill's in a dentist chair. Lucky them. Dad had to take him to the dentist. Picture taken over on Howard Street in front of Paul Guy's. That's Ruthie Guy. Of course, that's Paul sitting on the steps, And we never did find out who the kid was in the middle. That's Paul, and over that Ruthie guy. Winter scene, kind of hard to distinguish, but we'll bring them in a little. And I think you can recognize some of them. I don't know one way up on the left, but one in the back should be Lynn. Paul's right in front of her. Then I think the next one is Chucky Volpe. And down in front of Chucky, or Chucky Volpe, or Volpe, I forget his name anyway, but that's Christine and Tom Partington. So I can't get the other one in, but this is the crew here. Wintertime on a snowbank. Lynn and Paul and Christine and Tom. The other one we're not just too certain. I had to throw this picture in. Where the fire hall is now, it used to be a park. It used to be the Manchester Park, and that's the old dam behind the kids on the swings. Now this was taken at kind of a little family reunion, a fish family reunion they used to have. And that, of course, is in the swings. Standing up on the right is Paul. And then the next swing is JJ. And the next one should be Mark. So that should be Mark. This is JJ. And this is Paul. In a summer reunion down in the park. These three received their first communion. That's Grandma Fish. And then from left to right, of course, is Paul, Diane Fish, and Mark Maslin. So in front of Grandma Fish is Paul, Diane, and Mark. When they received their first communion, taken over in the church lawn. Taken out to Grandma Fish's, out to the fish farm at Christmas time. Now that's Uncle Andy Ryan sitting in a chair. And up behind him is Paul holding money. And then Lois Fish. And down in front of her is Miss Henry. And then comes Bill. And down below, in front of Bill, is Michael Henry. And over in front of Andy is Kurt Thomas. So maybe we can get them a little better, maybe. Bring them in. So they, down the bottom, you have Kurt Thomas, and you have Michael Henry, and above Michael is Bill, and then is Andy Ryan, Uncle Andy, and there's Paul holding money, Lois Fish, and Susan Henry. This has got to be at a Christmas time, because Paul must be holding his present. He got money. Off his flower pot and his flowers, and of course he had to put Paul in the picture. Picture of Paul, his mother, and I. Of course, this is Paul when he got the age. He had a few zits on his face. Couldn't resist showing that. Of course, Bill and Lynn's picture back on the wall. And backwards, and you'll notice that the barns in that are on the wrong side, but I took this picture just to show Paul the hunter. And I think he'd shot, I don't know what he had. I think he shot a duck. I think that's the one. The duck was so tough they couldn't eat it. I think they cooked it for 2 days. He got a wild duck down in a pond. He used to go down there quite often. All in one of his cars. They didn't always run the best, but that was Paul. As you see, the picture's backwards. He's on the wrong side. Looks very serious in this picture. Very serious driver. In his old Leapin' Lena. With a cornfield in the background. Paul in one of his early vehicles. Picture of Paul and Bill at Christmas time. With the tree in the background. The two brothers, all dressed up with ties on. And you can see the Christmas tree in the background. Some of these pictures will wander back and forth. This is Paul and Helen sitting on the planter. Paul's waiting to go to school. That's Paul and his mother while Paul is waiting for the school bus. Paul and I think the last hot rod he had down there. And of course, the brakes didn't work on it very well. But he drove it around. He drove it around the farm. That's Paul on his car. Show any partiality? So, we showed Paul with some of his girlfriends. And of course, he picked the blonde on this one. That's Paul in his heyday. They were single at the time, but this is Gary and Rita Maroka. The last year of school, Gary's family moved to the southern tier, so Gary stayed here with us. That's Gary and Rita. Gary and Rita Maroka. He was always wheeling and dealing at cars or something else. They had a dance that year.